Hi, I'm Kris Morettie here for TERRA Greenhouses. Behind me you'll see a brand new shade garden that I took on this weekend. Gardening in shade is one of the areas we get the most questions about. What can you plant and how do you do it? I've created this shade garden to make the most of a shady space in the yard that was previously a completely neglected corner. So I'm going to walk you through some of the favorite plants I chose to use in the shade and how it all came together. Take a look.
Here's what it looked like before we started, an overgrown path. There were lots of plants around the yard that I knew I wanted to move into the space, including some hostas, some ferns, and an Annabelle hydrangea, so I made a mental note of those before hitting the shade section at TERRA to determine what plants I would need. The trick I use with new gardens is to use the garden hose to lay out what my bed shape is going to be ahead of time. And then I called in the reinforcements. My partner and I worked on removing the turf. There's not really a super easy way to do this. You can start new beds in fall by layering cardboard and compost, but we just did it the old-fashioned way and dug it out by hand. I always amend with triple mix when I'm planting new shrubs. So knowing I was going to transplant in the Annabelle hydrangea, I had actually divided into 3 pieces. I decided that would be the backdrop of the new garden. So moving sections of that over into the triple mix amended section, I basically formed the backdrop of where the garden would be. With those in place, I then wanted to re-outline what my path was going to look like as well. So the path had been overgrown and the stones out of place. So initially I flattened out the area with my rake, repositioned them, and then I used my serrated trowel to go back into those sections and make sure that they were level and secure and stable for walking on. So just sort of dug out the underneath areas to make sure it was flat and that the stones set flush with the ground. Have to test them, of course. Let's have a look at the plants I chose. I went with a Sum and Substance hosta, one of the big guys, and contrasted with the blue of another large one, Big Daddy, one of my favorite hostas. Then I took the 2 in combination with this beautiful smaller version called Party Popper. You can see how the 3 play off of one another in those complementary lime green and blue colors. Then I introduced more lime green with the chartreuse of a Sunflare Hakonocloa, so that's a Japanese forest grass, which is great for shade. And then we brought in the coral bells, so I repeated that chartreuse color again with a lemon variety, and then brought in the complementary deep tones of a black version of a fancy leafed heuchera. So with a couple of those in place, I sort of set that full color scheme of chartreuse, blue, and that dark purple, and you can see how in contrast they all look amazing together. I always recommend that you place your plants into the garden before you start planting, so you can kind of have a visual idea. Doing that first, I then created holes where I wanted my transplanted material to come into, and then I dug them out of the garden and put them directly into the new spaces. So that's what you see me doing here. I'm filling in those spots that I had determined would be the transplanted material, put those in first, and then here we are planting in the new material. So this soil was luckily really gorgeous. So it didn't need a lot of amendment. I did put a layer of triple mix in, but for the most part it was really gorgeous. Sometimes when planting in shade, especially when you're close to cedars, you'll find there's a lot of root mass in the soil, so that's something to keep in mind. You might need to add more soil than you think. Obviously, newly planted material needs to be very well watered, so I made sure to do that before topping off with a layer of cedar mulch. The cedar mulch will help to suppress the weeds in the area, especially since I dug so much out, and will also help to maintain the soil moisture in between waterings. It also adds a finished woodsy look to the garden that I absolutely love. Using a transplant fertilizer is a really important step that many people skip. So especially with plant material I've moved and anything newly planted, I always use Quick Start to get it off to the best start to get the roots established as quickly as possible. And it's really easy to use. Just add to the water in the watering can and water it in. Our finished garden makes me really happy. It's now kind of a charming oasis in the corner of the yard and a great access point for the kids to run through into the back area that they love to play in. I'm really happy with the result. I think what I love most about shade gardening is thinking about foliage and using those textures, different colors, different shapes and sizes to play with foliage colors to brighten a spot instead of always relying on flowers. It's a refreshing change. For all shade gardening needs, visit TERRAgreenhouses.com.